come in and look at the information and say, this is information, DOJ, that you can't use, and this is information that you can use. Now, the other thing I think that they're asking for in this case is a more detailed receipt, essentially, of what was taken. That also, I'm not sure how much use that would do right now, because former President Trump's attorney already signed off on the original receipts. I suspect that this is more about responding to the political backlash of criticism that the former president, while he was railing against this search at Mar-a-Lago, he hadn't filed anything in court. And let's remember, he said out of court that he wanted the search warrant, the affidavit unsealed. But his attorney just sat in court. She didn't join that motion. And so I think this is more of a response to that criticism.
So do you think this is an attempt to slow walk the process?
I think it's an attempt to show that he's involved, that he's fighting, and yes, that if there is something to delay, I think your question is exactly right, then it would delay the process. We'd have to stop, the Department of Justice would have to stop looking at these documents, and usually it's something called a taint team that would look at the documents and basically put the documents that other members of the DOJ who would be walled off could use for the investigation, put those to the side, and put documents that they couldn't use in basically another pile. It would stop that work. And so, yes, it could delay the investigation. And I think that's probably part of the purpose here.
And so given that, what is the likelihood a special master could be appointed?
So I think at this point, what would happen is the judge would basically ask how far along in the process the investigators already are. Now, when the search warrant was executed, there's a law enforcement officer or officers who are in real time basically doing in part what Trump has asked for in this case, sifting through, again, someone who's probably a member of something called a taint team and saying, well, this information is tainted, meaning it's privileged or private, and we can't use this in the investigation. This information we can. It's part of the search warrant, and it's clearly within the investigation. So at this point, I think a judge would probably inquire how far along the investigation already is in terms of doing the work that a special master would do.
And if a special master were to be appointed in this case, I mean, how long would it take someone like that to review these documents and, you know, bring together this taint team, if you will, to go through the materials? Are we talking days, weeks, months?
So I think we could conceivably be talking about weeks, just because in part, there's some reporting indication that it might almost be too late. And so it's been about 2 weeks since the search warrant was executed. That indicates that at least members of the Department of Justice, although that's a team, not just one special master, that they have been working quickly. Again, a lot of this is, as it should be, guesswork. This is a private investigation. It's not a open committee hearing like a January 6th committee hearing where we get to hear about what led up to their questions and everything basically plays out in the open. So some of this is, I wish I had more definitive answers, but some of this is guesswork. But I think we're not talking about years here. We're talking about weeks or months.
And then in terms of this request, as you mentioned, ultimately this will be up to a judge to decide. So walk us through some of those next steps.
So I think that a judge could ask for more information from the Department of Justice. Basically, where are you in the process? Have you already completed the process of putting information that's privileged and private in one pile, information that you can use in an investigation in another? Might ask the Department of Justice for more information about how they went about that. I do think it's important to point out here, the basis of the motion is, well, my Fourth Amendment rights have been violated, the protection against search and seizure. And so I need a special master to help remedy that, essentially to make sure that federal law enforcement officers haven't taken information to which they aren't entitled and aren't trying to use information that they can't use. I think it's important for people to know that this is something the Department of Justice is trained to do, can do as a matter of course. It doesn't mean that we don't have special masters at times and that there isn't a place for special masters, but this isn't the first time that the Department of Justice has had to go about the process of sifting through information they can use and cannot use. That's why we have terms like taint team. That's why they know beforehand what they're looking for. And I think the former president has also asked for a little bit more information, basically on the front end of what were FBI agents told that they could get, and then on the back end, again, the receipt. But, in this case, it is important to know this is not the first time members of the Department of Justice have had to do this particular inquiry.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of this special master request, how unusual is a request like this?
So I'm pausing for a moment because so much of this is unusual. Just searching the home of the former president, obviously everything is heightened when it comes to a case like this. I would say that asking for a special master, it's not unheard of. I'm specifically kind of choosing my words here because I don't think it's the common course either. But what is unusual is the timing here. The delay is what's unusual. And that, Nicole, really brings us to the first thing that we were talking about, where I said, it feels to me like this is more of a legal filing that is meant as a political reaction to criticism. If this were a theory that the former president's legal team was able to coalesce around early, if they thought immediately that there's a need for a special master, then you really need this filing faster. This is a filing where, quite obviously, time is of the essence, because you don't want the Department of Justice then sifting through. You want the special master there day one, immediately making these determinations.
And then I also want to turn to, some other legal developments that we saw today involving this judge who is involved in the case there in West Palm Beach, who basically rejected the government's request formally to keep this affidavit that was used in the search completely sealed. We know that this judge will be making a decision on this later in the week, but in essence, by rejecting the government's request, does that mean that ultimately we could see what was in that affidavit?
Maybe some of it. And so part of what we saw today is really a memorialization of what happened last week, of a magistrate judge saying, I've looked at the affidavit and I think that it's possible here that some of this can be released to the public. And again, what the magistrate judge said last week is, Department of Justice, I understand you have concerns. I understand that there are national security concerns. There are concerns dealing with the safety of witnesses. There are concerns about the investigation and basically revealing a roadmap. So what you need to do, Department of Justice, is reach a higher threshold here. Don't just tell me you have these concerns and so none of the affidavit can be released, but go line by line and mark each of the places that you think need to be redacted and then come tell me why. The reason that I really hedged in the beginning of the answer is because even that probably isn't the end of the story. So the Department of Justice will come to the magistrate judge and try to basically defend themselves as to why certain portions, or a huge percent of the portions, we don't know, need to be redacted. The judge will make a determination, but that's an appealable order. So that can be appealed in this particular case up to the Chief Justice of that district. And so this isn't the end of the story here. I suspect, my gut tells me, if we do see some information, I'm not sure it's going to be that much more than what we already saw in the search warrant, because I think judges will be circumspect about the Department of Justice saying, we have national security concerns, we're worried about the safety of our witnesses, and we're worried about chilling additional witnesses from coming forward.
Jessica, we want to pause for a moment to bring in our Nicole Skanga, who is on the phone. She is CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter. Nicole, want to get your thoughts on this as we see the former president has just put out a statement on this.
Yeah, absolutely, Nicole. And it's interesting, former President Donald Trump seeking the appointment of what's called a special master, so just an independent lawyer who, if greenlit by the federal magistrate, would review and return evidence collected during the FBI's authorized search of his Mar-a-Lago estate. I think what's interesting is a special master really only comes into play when a party claims that evidence seized is privileged. and the Trump legal team asserting here executive privilege. As our senior White House producer Arden Fari has noted, if what the Trump team is alleging here is true, and there were documents seized in the FBI search that were covered by executive privilege, it really raises the question if President Trump is confirming that he violated the Presidential Records Act by failing to turn over purported White House documents to the National Archives and Records Administration. Another thing here that we're seeing the Trump team citing Rule 41F of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, requiring that federal law enforcement leave what is called a receipt of property from the items that were taken during the search. Of course, we got an abridged version of that once the search warrant was unsealed, but curious if that will come through, if we will learn more regarding what exactly was taken from the former president's estate. And Nicole, lastly, just want to say that, looking through this document, we are learning more from former President Trump's legal team regarding the events that led up to the FBI's authorized search, namely on June 8, 2022, a lawyer for the government, Jay Bratt, requested that the storage room where the documents were allegedly being stored needed to be secured. In response, Mr. Trump's legal team saying that, his team placed a second lock on the door to the storage room. One was added, and also that members of his personal and household staff were made available for voluntary interviews by the FBI. That's new information that we're learning. And then again, on June 22nd, 2022, the government subpoenaing the custodian of records for the Trump Organization, seeking that surveillance footage from surveillance cameras at Mar-a-Lago. The Trump legal team indicating here that service of that subpoena was voluntarily accepted, that video was handed over to the government.
And I do want to cite a little bit of the former president's statement while I have you, just to reiterate for folks who are just joining us. The former president's lawyers have filed a motion asking for an independent arbitrator called a special master to review evidence in the Mar-a-Lago search that happened earlier this month. The former president in the statement saying that we are now demanding that the Department of Justice be instructed to immediately stop the review of documents. He goes on to say we are demanding the appointment of a special master to oversee the handling of materials taken in the raid. And he goes on to say that he believes that this search of his home was illegal and unconstitutional. But, Nicole, we know that federal authorities say otherwise.
Absolutely. And Nicole, it's worth even just looking at the former president's statements side by side by, this brief that was issued by his legal team. Many of our colleagues have noted that there is a political nature to this motion itself, that, on the first page here, it says, quote, politics cannot be allowed to impact the administration of justice. President Donald J. Trump is the clear front runner in the 2024 Republican presidential primary and in the 2024 general election, should he decide to run. Very political in nature, this legal motion is, and not once but twice in this document does Mr. Trump's legal team refer to him as the clear front runner in the 2024 presidential election. Of course, the former president has not yet announced, or weighed in on his decision to run or not. But worth noting that in addition to some of the legal jargon we're seeing here, this is really a political document as well.
And just to follow up with you on that, because I know Jessica also raised the point earlier about the timing of this particular motion, do we know why the former president's legal team didn't file any type of motion when this affidavit was initially contested last week?
Yeah, it is surprising timing, Nicole. And I was in the courtroom last week, during the hearing between media organizations and the government. At that time, the Trump legal team had only one representative in the room, Christina Bobb. She is not listed on this motion. So, without speculating here, we have been reporting that the former president has struggled to sort of get his legal team together and on the same page. Perhaps, the timing is a reflection of that, playing catch up here. But certainly is surprising that we are seeing this motion come in this late in the game that the president's legal team was essentially silent in the days leading up to the hearing last Thursday, and has decided that, this is the moment to go forth with this.
Do we know, besides this motion, whether the president's legal team is plotting any other legal maneuvers or steps?
At this point in time, Nicole, we know that, this is the next step from the former president's legal team. It would not shock us if he took further steps down the line. But we have, been reporting out in recent days that what we expected from the president's legal team was a request for this special master and also this inventory list that is being requested here under Criminal Rule 41F, this receipt of property. And so, we had reported that it was potential for this motion to come out sometime over the weekend. We weren't sure if we would see it on Friday. Monday rolls around. The clerk is back in federal court in West Palm Beach. And, just before the end of the news day, we're now seeing this motion come forth. And so, the timing, as we've reported, whether or not, the former president's legal team is playing checkers or chess here and has several moves panned out, we promise to keep our viewers posted on that front.
All right. Well, Nicole Sganga, thank you so much for your reporting and for joining us. I want to turn now to CBS legal contributor Rebecca Royfi. She joins me now. And Rebecca, just explain the significance of this filing.
Well, everything in this case is significant. I think it's important to understand with this filing that the president is asking for a special master. That's fairly unusual in a circumstance like this. I think if we remember back to Michael Cohen and the search of his office, there was a special master appointed, and that makes sense because the bulk of material are going to be communications between clients and lawyers. In this situation, it's quite different because it isn't explicitly a search of a lawyer's office where you expect to find a lot of material that will be subject to the attorney-client privilege. And so if there is one document or two documents that are covered by the privilege, we don't usually have a special master appointed to review that. We trust that the Department of Justice will put those documents aside, return them, and not look at them. So the question is whether the court treats this differently. It would seem to me unlikely, both because of the substance of the request and, as we were talking about earlier, the timing of the request.
So could this potentially end up hurting or helping former President Trump?
So, I don't think it'll end up helping him. I do think that, as you were just discussing, I think there's a political element to this filing. One, the former president does not like to be passive. He does not like to sit there while things happen to him, but rather to fight back. So I think this is in keeping with his MO in that particular way. And second of all, I think it sends a political message, one that he's been trying to hammer on repeatedly and has been quite successful for him, which is that these investigations, these searches, these actions by the federal government are politically motivated, and they mark the denigration of our democracy, not anything that he did. So he tries to turn the tables back around, accusing those who are investigating him of doing exactly what they have accused him of doing. And, I think he's more likely to succeed on the political front than he is on the legal one here, because I just don't think there's much of a leg to stand on from a legal perspective. Plus, there is that fact that he waited so long to do this. If he was really concerned about privileged material in those documents recovered by the DOJ and the FBI, why didn't he enter this motion earlier or at one of the other court hearings?
All right, Rebecca Royfi, thank you so much for your expertise and for joining us. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with Red and Blue just ahead. You are streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
I identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
As American voters are heard, the CBS News political team brings understanding of what America decides. Streaming tomorrow night at 9 on the CBS News app.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Killian coming to you from our Washington, D.C. bureau. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Here's a look at some of the stories we're watching right now. Lawyers for former President Donald Trump have filed a lawsuit this afternoon seeking a special master to review evidence in the search of the Mar-a-Lago estate. Robert Costa joins us from West Palm Beach with the very latest on the developments. Voters in Florida will pick Democratic challengers to Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio in tomorrow's primary elections, where things stand in the Sunshine State. Meanwhile, New York's historic primary election will force at least one longtime Democratic House member out of Congress, while voters in the Empire State have to return to the polls for a second time this year. Plus, a look at the issues at stake. And later this hour, a federal appeals court agrees to delay Senator Lindsey Graham's testimony in Georgia's 2020 election investigation, why a grand jury wants to hear from the South Carolina Republican. Plus, after advising 7 U.S. presidents and spending decades as the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci announces he's leaving government service, when he's set to step down, and what he plans on doing next. But we begin tonight with the news just happening late today. Former President Trump's lawyers have filed a court motion asking for an independent arbitrator called a special master in the Mar-a-Lago search. If appointed, a special master would review evidence in the case. In a statement announcing the motion, the former president called the search an unnecessary, unwarranted, and un-American break-in. For more on this, Robert Costa joins us now. He is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Bob, former President Trump's lawyers have just filed a motion requesting the appointment of a special master. You broke this story a few days ago. Why are they requesting this?
This is weeks after the FBI searched former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate just across the water behind me. They went in there in early August looking for classified material that they believed former President Trump took with him in the final days of his administration from the Trump White House to his estate in Florida without going through the National Archives. And after they heard about that, they began to investigate whether former President Trump properly handled those documents, the classified material in some of those boxes, and it began this federal investigation. After the FBI search, there has been an outcry among Trump's supporters and from Trump himself, as well as his lawyers. But until now, we haven't had a clear picture about how exactly they would respond beyond anger. And today's filing is the first step they've taken in a few days, at least, to show their next legal plan on this front, which is to contest the search in some way by requesting a so-called special master. In other words, a neutral party to come in and work with the Justice Department, work with the Trump lawyers to have what they believe would be an independent arbiter to look over this material, this evidence, and possibly return it. It's going to be complicated, though, because you have a federal judge in Florida who's right now evaluating how to handle whether to release the affidavit that led to the warrant, whether to redact all or some of that affidavit. And that deadline is Thursday for the government to submit its material on that front. And so now added to this discussion is the Trump decision today to file this motion asking for a neutral party to review it all. It leads us into uncharted waters later this week about where this probe is going between the Trump lawyers and the Justice Department.
And so in terms of the judge that you just mentioned who did formally reject the government's request to keep the search affidavit fully sealed, I mean, based on that, does this mean potentially we could see some portions of this affidavit come later this week?
It's certainly possible, but Judge Bruce Reinhart here in West Palm Beach, Florida, he said in a 13-page order earlier today, which is essentially a statement of his opinion, his assessment of his view on how this is all going. He said today that he's going to listen to the government as it makes its case for redactions, and he might well side with the government in its belief that much of this affidavit, this underlying evidence, should not be made public. But he did note that he has not made a final decision on how to handle the affidavit because he stated he believes that there is a historic interest, intense public interest in having a lot of this underlying evidence be made public so people would understand why the former president's home here in Florida was searched by FBI agents. He said it's unusual circumstances that demands more answers from the government. But the government is saying repeatedly that because of sources, methods, dealing with witnesses, they don't want to say too much. And so at this point, it looks like it's going to be a battle between those who want to redact everything or most of everything and those who want it all in terms of the information about this case to be made public. We'll see where the judge ends up leaning. We won't know until about Thursday this week in that noon deadline here at the West Palm Beach courthouse.
As you alluded to earlier, this is complicated. So what is the political impact of all of this?
Complicated as well. It's hard to predict the political fallout, especially for a former president who is facing legal scrutiny, not only here in Florida, but just north in Georgia, the Fulton County grand jury investigation into Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election, the New York State Attorney General, the Manhattan District Attorney, the January 6th Committee on Capitol Hill, the Alan Weisselberg, his former CFO at the Trump Organization, now working with prosecutors in a case revolving the Trump Organization. So you see on all these different fronts, the former president dealing with legal challenges, but politically, polls show him in a strong position with Republican voters. But that doesn't mean he has the 2024 nomination sewn up should he decide to run. At this point, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis remains very popular with core Republican voters. And there are some new names out there, like Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, some names we've heard before, like Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who are all keeping an eye on the 2024 presidential race. Should Trump decide not to run, or should Trump run and somehow be hobbled politically or legally?
And as you know, there are still a lot of questions about what's in those classified documents and how they got down to Mar-a-Lago in the first place. What have you learned in your reporting about the former president's record keeping?
We've learned a lot in recent days about how this happened. How did classified documents get down to Mar-a-Lago behind me? Well, it's because the former president decided to bring them down. And the process is set up with protocol for when presidents, when they leave the White House in January after being defeated or retiring, that they have to work with the National Archives to hand over official presidential records, let the National Archives sift through them, and then they're given to the retired president, the former president, to deal with their own presidential records and presidential libraries. The former president, Donald Trump, did not go through that process with about 24 boxes that he had housed in his residence at the White House in the final days. And because he did not go through the National Archives process, federal prosecutors say some classified material from intelligence briefings ended up in those boxes that then got brought down to Mar-a-Lago and were stored in storage areas. And part of what prompted the search, we have learned today at CBS News, is that there's video surveillance that was acquired by the government after it issued a subpoena to the Trump legal team for that surveillance. And they see in the surveillance footage some people in and around and about, going into and out of the storage area inside Mar-a-Lago. Now, sources close to the Trump legal team say, don't read anything into that. It's just people who work for Trump being in the storage area. But this did concern, based on our reporting, federal investigators who worried that there might be too much access to this storage facility inside Mar-a-Lago.
Robert Costa with multiple developments for us tonight. Thanks so much from West Palm Beach, Florida.
Thank you.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said the fight for control of the Senate will be close during remarks earlier today in Kentucky. It appears to be a shift from his comments last week that the House is more likely to flip than the Senate.
Flipping the Senate? What are the chances? It's a 50-50 proposition. We got a 50-50 Senate right now. We got a 50-50 nation. And I think the outcome is likely to be very, very close either way.
The GOP senator went on to say that if Republicans take control of the House and the Senate in November, it will force President Biden to become more moderate. Florida is holding its primary elections tomorrow, and the results could set up several fierce battles come November. Sitting Congresswoman Val Demings is now running for